Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. I'm excited to air this episode because it's about a relatively taboo topic, the menstrual period. Dun dun dun! Even though it's a fact of life for decades of life for roughly half the people on the planet, it's really not talked about very much. Except for girlfriends commiserating about it, or people blaming it for a woman's bad mood, or the basic overview that we get in middle school biology class, we don't often talk about the menstrual cycle. Yet, in Chinese medicine, we consider the period as a little monthly status update about what's going on in the body as a whole. Is there enough blood? Is there enough of the reproductive essence? Is the qi unfolding smoothly and evenly as it flows around the body? Is internal heat causing too much bleeding? Is the qi stagnating or causing pain or breast tenderness or headaches? There's all kinds of information that it can give us. And it's a reflection of that ebb and flow of yin and yang that's constantly taking place, like the coming and going of the tide and the waning and waxing of the moon, and the fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone. It also doesn't have to suck. Just because symptoms like cramping and PMS are common doesn't mean there's something that all people who menstruate must resign themselves to. On today's episode, I speak with Bridgit Danner, a licensed acupuncturist and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. We discuss what you can do to help regulate and even embrace your menstrual cycle. Bridgit manages a community called the Women's Wellness Collaborative, which is centered around helping women increase wellness and balance in their lives, especially in relation to hormones, the menstrual cycle, and fertility. Bridgit practiced Chinese medicine for nearly 12 years and has performed over 12,000 treatments. She became passionate about women's health after her own postpartum health crisis. With the help of life coaching, holistic nutrition, functional medicine, and whole food cooking, she was able to recover from postpartum depression, Epstein-Barr virus, and adrenal dysregulation. I hope you enjoy the conversation, whether you menstruate or not. Welcome to the show, Bridgit. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Brodie. Nice to be here.
So you are an acupuncturist and functional medicine practitioner, and you host an online community focused on women's health. So you've got a unique perspective, or you've got a blended perspective on women's health and women's hormones, which is why I was hoping to get you to come talk on A Healthy Curiosity today. I'd love to talk about women's health, and in particular hormone balance, from a functional medicine perspective. So I thought you'd be a great person to lend your insights.
Yeah, well, I hope so. We'll see what goes out.
Well, first of all, could you let our listeners know what functional medicine is?
Sure. Well, it's a bit of a newer phrase, and I think there's a few ways to explain it. One way to explain it is getting to like the root cause of health issues and finding what we say is like our optional function. So optimal, I think.
Optimal function, yes.
Yeah, so that's one way. Another way to define it is that it's using kind of lab-guided and more like cutting-edge scientific knowledge, but then a lot of the modalities and remedies are very historic and natural. So that's another way to define it. Some people, doing functional medicine are naturopaths who are running labs and using that kind of approach. And then, some folks like acupuncturists are getting more into it. Some health coaches are functional medicine coaches. In my view, it's often lab-guided and kind of modern in a way, but also is usually using nutrition or nutritional supplements.
It seems like it's really the future of allopathic medicine. To me, it seems like the most functional, pun intended, branch in that it's actually focused on wellness instead of just treating symptoms piecemeal.
I hope so, yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I didn't mention, there's a lot of MDs excited about it too. Hopefully that's growing. It seems like it takes 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, very slow evolution. But people are definitely, I think, ready to be looking at how things interconnect as opposed to seeing the body as a bunch of different parts that don't interrelate and connect. Part of hormone balance, right? We can't really talk about hormone balance without talking a little bit about diet and a little bit about stress and a little, just because it's all one thing, or at least that's my understanding. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. And I wanted to say too, certainly, you're a Chinese medicine practitioner, and so was I for many years. Like, certainly everything's interconnected, and we're trying to get to the root cause as well. But I think what is different, and at least for me, it was really exciting as I learned about functional medicine, was, my training was very traditional in Chinese medicine, the 5 branches and the organs and the meridians, and it's all amazing when you learn it. But my particular training was pretty weak in Western medicine, and I couldn't really relate Chinese concepts to more modern concepts, and sometimes that's fine. Like, you can go to your acupuncturist and you don't have to totally understand how to frame it in modern terms, and it can still totally work. But for my mind, a lot of things clicked when I started to learn about functional medicine, and I really started to use that language to explain things even to my acupuncture clients, and I just kept getting pulled that way.
I am inclined to agree with you in the sense that we face a lot of really different problems than people may have thousands of years ago when Chinese medicine was developed. And certainly it's not one stagnant thing, and it has evolved over time. But a lot of times, looking through the functional lens, we can see things a little differently in a way that can really enhance our practice and integrate it. Is there something that you're thinking of in particular where you were like, oh yeah, this totally fits?
Yeah, well, something I was just thinking that came to mind as you were saying that is, like, when I was learning Chinese medicine, and I think we had some kind of class on nutrition, and they would be like, well, for yin deficiency, eat chicken feet or something, and you'd be like, what?
Like, chicken feet on every menu, right?
Yeah, which, they do in China, and eat all sorts of things. But, like, to my Western mind, I was like, I have no idea why I would eat a chicken foot. I do not want to. Right, but now we know, like, some of the nutrients that are in tendons and ligaments, and that you could cook a chicken carcass and make this powerful broth. It's good for your immune system and your skin, and
a lot more people are going to be able to get behind the idea of bone broth or gelatin or collagen as a supplement as opposed to chicken feet.
Yeah, or like, before I was like, I even studied in China, I was like, no thanks, chicken feet. But for me, I if I understand something and why it would be good for me, then I'm open to it. So yeah, connecting some of those dots was really interesting. And I don't know, maybe I'll go back someday and sort of try to link up in a more guidebook sort of way, like some of those Chinese concepts to functional medicine concepts, because I think there is crossover. But then, like you mentioned, not everything does cross over. Like, when I studied in China, it was all like, let's study the classics and febrile diseases, and those aren't really the challenges in 2016. There's toxins now in everything, and that's not something they faced then. And if we do have a febrile disease, we can take antibiotics if we need to. So, yeah, I think, it's okay to marry the old and the new.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was exploring your YouTube channel a little while ago, around the time that I was recording something for your YouTube channel, and came across one on seed cycling for the period. So I was hoping that we could talk about that maybe when we start talking about the periods and things. But what struck me is that, in Chinese medicine, when we think about using food as medicine, we think about the seeds being the germ of the whole new plant, right? They contain the reproductive essence of the plant. And so when we're thinking about nourishing the reproductive essence of a human being, it's like it makes a lot of sense that we would be using the seeds, and that's right there in Chinese medicine, and sure enough is borne out in this functional medicine, more scientific way. So I think, like, there's so much there that's just simply being explained differently, or put in a different context.
Exactly.
So let's dive into women's health and hormone balance through different phases of life, but starting with the period, something that most women deal with on a monthly basis for decades, and that not everyone necessarily understands completely what's going on with that and the different cascade of hormones that takes place, and why certain things can get a little wonky. So I was hoping that you could just unpack that for us a little bit and just give people a nice overview of the different phases of the menstrual cycle.
Sure. I love to talk about this because I think even, most very educated women don't know much about their period. There isn't much education for most of us when we're young girls getting our period for the first time, and sometimes there's some shame and weirdness around it. And, often nowadays young girls, even probably when you and I were young, get pushed into birth control really quickly as symptom management or indeed for birth control.
Mm-hmm.
So
I feel like it's so heartbreaking when girls are put on the pill for things like acne before they even get to know themselves and their cycles, and it seems like a kind of a tragic thing to take people away from what's happening naturally and to chemically hormone regulate it.
Yeah, it really is. And, I talked about the 40, 50 years to catch on, and I really think it takes, us as moms and aunties and educators to start teaching grown women about it so they can teach teenagers about it. And one thing you talked about, the cycle getting wonky, it often starts out wonky because the body is just figuring out what to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's not used to that yet. It's not in the rhythm.
Yeah, and the hormone levels can be very high. Menstrual pain is more prevalent. Like you mentioned, acne is more prevalent. Periods can be more irregular. And then a lot of teenage girls are under stress, so don't eat well, so that doesn't help either.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right from the beginning it can be wonky, but as it evens out, we'll get into how it should look. It should be about 28 days, and you ovulate in the middle around day 14. The first day you have a bleed, a significant bleed, is day 1, and that bleed should happen for 3 to 5 days. I would say more like 5 days, with a couple days being heavier and a few days being lighter. It shouldn't be so heavy that you are, needing to change your pad every hour. It shouldn't be like a crisis situation on your heavy day. It should not be painful, but it is okay to be maybe a little tired, a little withdrawn, but not to the extreme.
Yeah, a lot of the young women that I work with, and I ask them how their period is, they'll say, "Oh, it's fine." And what they mean by that is that they're having terrible cramps, but they just assume that that's what has to happen. Like, oh, isn't that normal? Doesn't everyone have terrible cramps with their period? And so it's because it's not really talked about, except for perhaps commiserated with friends who are in pain, that it's really, it's not, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, exactly. There's, a lot of misconceptions, and for better or worse, there's a lot of things to hide our symptoms, like birth control and Advil. Those things work really well. So, but yeah, really, as your cycle matures, that should be, around the 28 days, and go through these different phases, like you're more withdrawn, maybe during your period, but then as it ends, there's some great resources from these women who made an app called The Flow. I'll mention that if people want to look it up. It kind of talks about all the moods and kind of feelings you'll go through the month. And as your period ends, it's a really good time to be productive and knock off your to-do list and do things you've been putting off, like your taxes or something. So that's maybe a mode that comes next. And then as you move out of that, you start to move into the sexy phase. Your hormones are all ramping up. You're getting ready to ovulate, and it's sort of the time that nature helps you to reproduce. So, you're looking more attractive to the opposite sex. You're putting out those pheromones, moving into ovulation. And that's, again, day 14. And then following that, if your cycle's off, you might have 2 whole weeks of, spotting, moodiness, bloating. But that's really just low progesterone. That's not meant to happen. So that second 2 weeks can be like some greater intuition or the wise woman phase, but it shouldn't be misery for 2 weeks or even for 3 days. There could be like a little, dropping like we talked about, or turning inward, right, as the cycle comes. So yeah, our moods do change as women every week of the month.
So to summarize what you just said, basically, as the period's ending, it's like the end of the cycle. So clean out your closet time.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and then And then we move into the beginning of the cycle where, well, around ovulation, it's like get your sexy on, and that. But what would you say, like the beginning part of the cycle? What would
bleeding?
be a good thing for, or just the like after the period ends?
That's sort of the check off your to-do list time.
To check off.
So yeah, like in your period time, you might be more like reflective, and you could be even a little sad, and when you clear out all that blood, there's toxins in there, there's sort of energetic stuff in there you're clearing out, and it might be when you realize you're really sick of this or that, or you get things seem a little clearer, and you might be a little emotional, and then when that's over, you're a little become a little more practical again.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And it just, from a Chinese medicine perspective, we think of blood as the medium for emotions and identity. And so it's kind of like that old sense of who we are has moved on through. And then it's kind of like we're producing the Nuchian blood of who we're going to be, and like kind of reprioritizing.
Interesting. I love it.
So then mid-cycle, I love that you brought up that we literally are, like, people are more likely to find women attractive at ovulation, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've really only recently, gotten into these stages of the cycle, and then I'm noticing them more in myself. And, even if you're married or whatever, and you're not, you're still more attractive. Like, I think one of my colleagues said, that's the time to, get a free something at the store, or get
absolutely, do your photo shoot,
get a raise, you are, so we can embrace these phases instead of trying to suppress them. And this can be at any age or stage. We can learn about it from puberty, we can think about it as we really embrace our careers in our 20s. We can, use it when we're trying to get pregnant, tune into our signs and what our body wants, and, what would nourish it at the time. It's pretty cool stuff.
Absolutely. I love that you also brought up the idea of it being okay to rest during the period, or if you're tired around that phase of the cycle, because, we're in this culture that so emphasizes the doing and the speed and the productivity, and it's sort of like, what's wrong with me that I can't just be like my normal productive action shiro self? And it may actually not be pathology at all. It may just be what your body needs, and giving yourself permission to rest, I think can be really huge.
Yeah, I remember I was supposed to interview this friend of mine who's like a big time women's health period coach, and she's like, it's the day one of my cycle and I'm just not up to it. I want to reschedule it. At first I was like, well, that's weird. You're supposed to have like perfect periods. You're very good. And I was like, well, that's really great, because she's just accepting that she's on day one of her cycle. I actually am today too, which is probably why I said optional instead of optimal. You're just not totally on it in quite the same way. And you can't always cancel everything, certainly.
Right.
But if you have the option to, not go to like kickboxing, or I don't know, just not do certain like extreme things, maybe
definitely
out there. Yeah, because we all know like we can sometimes put our foot in our mouth when we're in that more emotional phase. So just think about it.
Right. Like, how can you support yourself? Like, maybe it's not kickboxing, maybe it's a gentle walk or a gentle yoga class or some qigong or something like that still allows you to move and breathe, but without taxing. And like you said, just recognizing, like, putting yourself in situations where maybe it's okay to not be as totally sharp.
Yeah.
So I want to circle back to seed cycling, because I thought that was a really awesome offering that you have on your channel, and so and a way of supporting the period through diet. Could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, and as we went through that fake cycle, example cycle, I didn't really talk about the hormones. Day one of your cycle, or day 28, is when your hormones are the lowest. Everything's dropped, and literally your uterus drops too. Everything goes out of it. But at the same time, things are ramping back up. Right away, the body says, oh, everything's low. It's time to start all over again. And if you have tried to get pregnant, you probably know some of the terms about FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, comes down from your brain to tell your ovary it's time to start growing our follicles to make a ripe egg again. Follicles start making more estrogen, and that grows your uterine lining. So those processes are going. So that first 2 weeks of the cycle, we do seed cycling to support estrogen and estrogen clearance. So a lot of my ladies who did the seed cycling were like, well, what if I'm estrogen dominant? I don't think I should do this. But these are more gentle estrogens, right? It's just from seeds. It's not, a drug or anything. So we're gently supporting protective estrogens, not inflammatory estrogens. And the seeds have fiber that helps with clearance as well, which is really important.
Absolutely. And there's a huge difference, right, between the estrogens that we're getting from plastics or from hormones from meat and dairy and things like that versus the phytoestrogens from plants.
Yeah.
It's a completely different
very
thing.
Different. But it's a good question. It makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, and I always say, too, if people are saying, well, I'm worried about getting too much estrogen, well, we always need estrogen to make progesterone because progesterone is made primarily after we release that ripe egg at ovulation. What's left behind is called the corpus luteum, and it's this yellow organ, I guess you could say, that makes progesterone. So the body knows, the body's designed that once the egg goes off, that it might be fertilized, and it needs progesterone to raise our body temperature and stimulate certain processes to protect potential fetus. So to make progesterone, it's just like about yin and yang, Brodie. Like one feeds the other. They all always feeding the other. Estrogen feeds progesterone and vice versa in a way. So then we do support the estrogen for 2 weeks, and then we support the progesterone with another 2 seeds. So I didn't mention the first time is pumpkin and flaxseed, and the second phase is sesame and sunflower. So the sesame sunflower support progesterone production. For example, they have a lot of B6, which is good for making progesterone. And so, you take those and the oils and the micronutrients and, again, the fiber help you make progesterone and help clear things out. Yeah, and it works great for most people. I mean, there'll be some people it doesn't work for because they can't digest certain seeds.
Yeah, flax can be problematic for a lot of people. Do you have a substitute?
You can just do pumpkin if you can't do
just
flax.
Pumpkin by itself.
Yeah, and you can also do other oils too. Like I think we just say kind of do fish oil the first 2 weeks, and then you can do borage oil the second 2 weeks. So there are modifications if something doesn't work for you. And then also it seems like some people don't tolerate the sunflower sesame. It seems like for some women, when you try to boost progesterone, it goes sideways for them. Like they get more acne or more irritable. And I don't 100% know why that is, but I know I'm learning a little bit with the herb Vitex.
Vitex. I was just going to say Vitex.
That goes sideways too, right?
Like,
sometimes it doesn't work for everybody. And one thing I've learned is it suppresses prolactin, which can be good in most cases, but it does something with your neurotransmitter production, which can go a little weird for some women. So I think with the seeds, occasionally, I think it's super, super occasional, maybe 1 in 100 cases, people feel funky, like their neurotransmitter production gets thrown off, and they get moody from the seeds.
And that's, obviously this is not across the board medical advice. It's something that we can try in the laboratories of our own bodies and then figure out whether or not, because it's basically just food.
Yeah, it's not dangerous.
It's using plants, and these are particularly strong plants with strong effects, but obviously if it's not making you feel good, it's not a good thing to do. Yeah.
And I'm probably scared of it enough, but most of the time it's totally fine. But just to know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yes, and a lot of times I've had women report back that they just feel really supported, or that it feels like nourishment to be doing this.
Yeah, and it helps you get in touch with your cycle because, ideally, everyone can get busy, but sometimes you'll ask, well, where are you at in their cycle? And women are like, I have no idea. And, ideally we want to be more in touch, and doing the seed cycling is a way to stay more in touch.
Yeah. Do you know, you probably do, the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility?
I do. I haven't owned it in a long time, but it's still a very popular book.
Yeah, it's one that I recommend to women who want to start just getting in touch with their cycle. And essentially, she just walks you through the cervical fluid check and how to see when you're ovulating and how, and it can be really empowering, I think, to know sort of when, especially in terms of sexual health, when you're likely to get pregnant and may want to abstain or use some sort of barrier method versus when you're pretty free and unlikely to get pregnant. And that can a lot of times alleviate a lot of fear around fertility and wanting there to be an off switch for it.
Yeah, because really there's a very small window where you can get pregnant, and I totally can relate to being afraid of getting pregnant if you don't want to and not understanding your body. But actually there's a lot we can do to understand, and we can even use that awareness as a method of birth control once we train it in enough.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more that the more people can tune into where they are in their cycle, it can be really empowering on a lot of levels. It's like understanding ourselves emotionally and understanding ourselves, obviously, reproductively.
Mm-hmm.
This episode of A Healthy Curiosity is brought to you by the Basics of Chinese Medicine, a unique 8-week deep dive course to help you understand your inner ecosystem and start to make more medicinal choices in your daily life. To reserve your spot for the fall, visit brodiewelch.com and click the Learn from Home tab. So with PMS, or problems that can happen around period time, any other advice that you might have for people, either in terms of movement or attitude or supplements or anything?
Yeah, so we mentioned earlier, usually PMS is related to low progesterone in comparison to estrogen.
Right, or a relative estrogen dominance is how that's often framed up.
Often, progesterone often gets stolen to make hormones for stress handling.
The pregnenolone steal, right?
Pregnenolone steal. So, the pregnenolone is a precursor for progesterone and cortisol. And cortisol is something that we do need, and it should cycle through us every day.
And cortisol, for those who may not know, is the major hormone that tends to build up when we're under chronic stress.
Yes. We are meant to have cortisol for energy, but we aren't meant to be in chronic stress, and many of us are, even sometimes when we don't really admit or know that we are. We are. Just modern life is demanding, and there's lots of stimulation.
Especially with things like travel, like I'll often I'll ask women about like how's your stress level, or like how busy is life these days, or how fast is life these days, and people will be like, oh, it's pretty good. I was like, I just got back from the East Coast and then I got on a plane and I jumped at, it's like people who are traveling all over the place. It could be fun, but it's still a fair amount of stress on the body.
And commuting. I was just interviewing. We're just hiring a new office assistant, and I asked them, so many of our clients come in and they're stressed out because they were running late, and then they got in traffic, and then they couldn't find parking, and they come in really pissy. Mm-hmm. Usually it's projected at us. It's somehow our fault. Mm-hmm. And it's just very stressful to get across town in traffic. So you live in a smaller town, so you might not have to deal with that quite as much.
We've got our 5 minutes where it's really bad. But yeah, what you're describing, it's like that's just one thing that someone has to deal with in their day, where like maybe the rest of their life is fine, but these little stressors that can feel bigger, and that can, at any time we kind of get tight and tense or go into fight or flight mode, that will raise cortisol. And from my understanding, if that happens once every 3 days, you're likely to have elevated cortisol levels in the body.
It's so easy to get them, unfortunately. So I think just being a real master, constantly working on how you handle stress and reducing sources of stress, and snapping out of stress when you feel it is really huge. So that's one area. And you mentioned movement, and I think it's great to keep moving in that second phase of the cycle. For some women, that can be a huge help. Just like when you're in labor, they say move around. Just kind of keeping that blood moving, like in Chinese medicine, so it doesn't get stagnant as we're starting our period. Then you can just, like you said, do what exercise you're called to do, but keep moving, and sweating is a way to detox. Because as we have our period, we're processing a lot of hormones, like we said, our hormone levels totally drop. Well, where do those hormones go? They have to be cleaned out and recycled. Yeah. That's a big job. So when we get into that big job, if we're already, processing a lot of toxins and stress and we're not moving and we're not sleeping enough, then that job of clearing hormones is too much for the body, and you're going to feel it. So yeah, there's movement, drinking more water, even just eating cleaner, having more greens. You might be attracted to having like more juices, green drinks. And then all month long, to be keeping toxins down, but maybe even especially at that end, like probably going out for 3 to 5 drinks or whatever your pleasure is not going to help out. And that's more toxins. Alcohol gets in the way of progesterone production. It keeps your blood sugar high. So unfortunately, alcohol and sugars, caffeine, all the turns to make progesterone. So if you are struggling and you feel like you've tried everything, but you haven't cut out coffee and you haven't cut out alcohol, you can just, do it as an experiment for 1 month and see what happens.
Oh, yeah. Coffee especially. I see like breast tenderness and menstrual cramps clear up so quickly when women quit coffee. A lot of times very quick.
Yeah. I mean, it's always like those things that we don't want to give up that are usually what...
Right.
And I always say, just try it. Like, you don't have to be married to it, but you might find, like, you felt good, and when you went back to coffee, you didn't feel so good, and you might be motivated to change, and it might be a relationship that comes and goes for you, but at least give it a try.
Yeah, and I can't help but want to tie this back into Chinese medicine and the function of the liver, right? So like what you're talking about in terms of clearing hormones and kind of getting rid of the excess, as well as, it's like the liver and the period have this such close relationship where basically the liver powers the free flow of energy in the cycle, and that really the menstrual blood is considered liver blood. And so when we're heating our livers with alcohol or with coffee, both of which are energetically heating and energetically go to the liver, it has the potential to make all cycle-related stuff worse.
Yeah, and everybody's body is different, but those could be big triggers for you. And there's other triggers, there's just nutrient deficiency, there's the stress that we mentioned. So everybody's perfect solution will look differently.
Absolutely, yes. Based on our different constitutions and different imbalances that are there. So that's, I think, a really helpful overview of what goes on with the period. And then as we get older, right, we approach the nebulous, what can be 10 years long phase known as perimenopause. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the challenges of perimenopause and how you approach them with functional medicine.
Yeah, this is something I love to talk about too, because even just the word perimenopause is not in our cultural vocabulary yet. I don't think, menopause is. People like to talk about menopause and complain about menopause, and that's because of menopause. But sometimes what is actually perimenopause is being called menopause. So menopause is when your cycle is over. You haven't had a period for a year due to age, not due to other factors. And perimenopause is, like you mentioned, like a 10-year period before you enter menopause. And so, often that's around age 40. But really, actually, even at age 35, there starts to be more of a decline in egg quality, and that can make hormone production lower, can make your cycle more irregular, can affect fertility. So, maybe we can't exactly call age 35 perimenopause, but for some women, it could be.
Well, at age 35, there is a massive drop-off in the amount of progesterone that gets produced in the body, and so it seems to me like that certainly signals a different phase in life. And in Chinese medicine, we think about the cycles of 7, that every 7 years the body shows up differently in the world. So like puberty, age 14-ish, and age 35 is going to be another one of those multiples of 7. And then of course menopause itself is like another phase where we fundamentally show up differently in the world, and including changing hormonally. So yeah, I think 35 is often when people notice that things are maybe periods are more frequent than they used to be or heavier than they used to be. Like they start to notice that progesterone decline.
Worse PMS because of the low progesterone. Cycle is acting a little differently maybe than it did. I usually say, since I worked a lot with fertility, like age 35 to 39, I usually can still see people get pregnant and, maybe things are a little more complicated. But, things are still going. Things are changing.
Yeah.
And then after 40, it's harder to become pregnant. It's not impossible, but the odds are smaller every month. Just because we have a period doesn't mean that we ovulated or that we ovulated a really ripe, genetically sound egg. So
Yes.
that starts showing up in symptoms like we mentioned with PMS, but then it can also get into things like brain fog as we switch from like I don't remember the names of the progesterone or the estrogens. Estradiol is like the predominant one when we're younger, and then I think it's estrone that gets to be the dominant one in menopause. So there's a switchover that happens, and the brain has different like estrogen receptors, and it has to switch over, which is really interesting. So you can kind of have some brain farts because you're switching types of estrogen. So that's one thing that can go on. And hot flashes are the typical one that you hear about a lot. But there's other things like insomnia and weight gain and changes in your skin. So there's a lot that can happen to look forward to. But just knowing what's going on, I think, is really helpful. That hormone levels are changing, that your ovaries aren't as much the dominant player anymore as you get closer and closer to menopause, that we need to rely more on our adrenal glands is something important to know. As we talked about, they're the ones that make cortisol, and if they've been working their little butts off for decades to get you through traffic and night school and everything else, then when you hit perimenopause, sometimes you're really experiencing a lot of symptoms because they can't kind of pick up the slack to make sex hormones for you.
Oh, amen, sister. I am so glad you just brought that up because yes, like this is the number one important thing. I think if you're out there listening and you're in your 20s or your early 30s, it's like being highly motivated to get a handle on stress early is going to like the biggest favor you can do to your future self, because it's all coming out of that same pool of hormones. And so if our bodies are always going to prioritize survival over having babies, and so it's the kind of thing where if we use up all of our hormonal juice running from tigers and being in stress, fight or flight mode, there's going to be less for having like juicy reproductive hormones and making all of that easy. So it's like really great preventative to be thinking about having a practice, right? Having a body mind practice to manage stress, having and just getting a handle on it in whatever other ways. But yes, that is huge.
It's one of the tough things about modern life, which is I think very exciting and wonderful for women, but if we're out being very masculine and chasing our career, and frankly even like dating is very, often like going out to clubs and parties and bars, and like you're out, and you can kind of do it. You can kind of do it and keep up with it because you've got that essence still going on for you.
Yeah.
But then, you're going to get married at 30 and want to have a baby at 33, and you might find out that your hormones are really, really off, or maybe you're just getting off birth control and you realize you have no idea what's going on, and there's a toxicity of birth control. So, hopefully, and I think now, nutrition and healthy living really is coming more in vogue. So, hopefully now women are incorporating it more into their lives younger. But it's you're also like, it's never too late to learn this stuff and start to incorporate it, even if you're just hearing this all and you're 49 and going through the late stages of perimenopause. It's still not too late to nourish your adrenal glands and get into mind-body practices.
Is there anything in particular that you suggest for someone who is feeling perimenopausal? Maybe they're dealing with night sweats or hot flashes, or kind of around menopause. It's
really important for this age group to kind of some of the same stuff we talked about for PMS, but more you have to be even better. It's just like, I think getting the
Mhm.
toxins out of your life is really important. There's so many xenoestrogens, makeup and lotion and, plastics that we're touching and all that stuff. The one I pretty much say to start with is what you actually rub on your skin, like lotions and stuff. Start with those. Another.
The skin, it's an organ of absorption, and we forget that like basically the skin, if you don't want it basically injected into your liver, it's not a great idea to put it on your skin.
Yeah, it's really big. I think it is hard to conceptualize that it's really going in there. So, that could be a first thing to change is like your lotion. Look for the word fragrance on the label, and if it says that, put it back. So those are just a couple places to start is skincare products and the word fragrance. So that could be a way to reduce.
Yeah.
Eating more organic food if you're not already doing it is a great way to reduce. In your kitchen, not storing things in plastic. Don't microwave ever, but especially don't microwave plastic. What you clean your house with, it's so easy to switch over to using like baking soda and vinegar and that kind of thing. And then like we mentioned with the alcohol, so basically as your ovarian function decreases and you're making less hormones, you really need to rely on all your other organs and be really nice to them. So the adrenals we mentioned, and they like things like getting to bed by 10 p.m. and following the natural rhythms of nature. They really like eating at regular times and not gorging on sugar or skipping meals, because it's very stressful for your body to go through blood sugar spikes and dips.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things that the adrenals have to respond to, is because we think we're starving.
Yeah, so those are some things older women any woman can be getting into, but for older women, especially with the weight issues, liver, adrenals, blood sugar are 3 systems to really start loving.
Absolutely. And really with just thinking about hormones, well, cycles are cycles. And so thinking about the diurnal cycle, the cycles of day and night, in addition to the cycles of month to month and year to year, right? That the more regularity we can create in terms of regular meal times and regular bedtimes, and that sets its own rhythm that the body can sink into comfortably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to tune into those rhythms of the seasons and the day. And that goes a long, long way.
Totally agreed. So I know you mentioned to me earlier when we were chatting that you have some resources available on your site where people can do a little self-assessment.
Yeah, just on the home page of our site. So our community is called Women's Wellness Collaborative. The URL is just my name, BridgitDanner.com, and right there on the home page we have this quiz, and it's actually a lot of what we talked about today. So underneath your hormone issues, are there adrenal issues, blood sugar issues, thyroid issues? So it's a quiz to just, you get to assess some of the symptoms and signs that you're feeling, and it will score it for you and give you some starting off suggestions. So that's kind of our gift for people getting started on this. It also has a little video about understanding your cycle, which is appropriate to what we've talked to today, and it comes also with an ebook about decreasing stress. So all the things we talked about.
Nice. What an excellent little resource you have available.
Yeah. So that's on our site. And I wanted to mention that we have a podcast called Women's Wellness Radio, and we talk about a lot of this stuff too with guests. And we have almost 100 episodes, and we've got some on perimenopause and fertility and understanding your cycle. So a really great library of stuff. If there's anything here that kind of sparks your interest, you could go back and find an episode. And, of course, you're welcome to subscribe as well.
Such an excellent resource for people. Wonderful. Well, Bridgit, I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with us today about hormone balance. And yeah, this has been really informative, and certainly we'll put links to the show, or links in the show notes to those resources that you mentioned. So any final bits of advice that you have to offer?
Yeah, I would just say, always great to implement and just start anywhere. If you just heard this and you want to start drinking more water, or you want to look up seed cycling, or just any one little thing, don't be overwhelmed, but implementation is important. So just start with something. And then lastly, I just want to say this was so much fun. I could have talked for like 5 hours. So.
Well, maybe we'll have to do this again sometime.
Oh, it was really great.
Well, thanks so much, Bridgit. It was great having you on the show. Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodiewelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.